I have always felt in my career a profound sense of responsibility, because when you are talking about spiritual issues, you are talking about someone's psyche, and people are holding a space for the possibility that you're saying something that will deeply affect the way they look at the world and how they behave in the world. So that has always seemed to me very serious. Today, probably even more so, because of the state of the world and our need to rise to the occasion of saving our democracy and saving our planet in time. Well, I think if we're old enough, we remember a time when this sociopathic economic perspective did not yet dominate everything. And if you were born after a certain period of time, you don't remember a time when that would have been considered insane. So now you don't even realize it. People are brought up to just so inundated by this monstrosity born of Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand, this trickle-down economic perspective that says market forces matter, market forces rule. It's really, which amounts to, doesn't matter who has to die, doesn't matter what happens to be done to the planet, and we're all in lockstep with it. I take seriously my role as keeper of the story. There was a time when it was understood that capitalism too had to have an ethic. Had to have ethics. Corporations should have ethics. Our economy should have ethics. That money should not be the bottom line. That love should be the bottom line.
But some of the civil rights icons of the previous century, like you already mentioned, Gandhi, where the sort of fusion of spirituality and politics is total and entirely accepted, and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in this country.
And abolition emerged from the Quakers.
Really?
So all the great social justice movements, certainly in this country, and as you were talking about Gandhi, emerged from the spiritual and religious impulse.
How do you propose to remain in the conversation about politics at a time when media is used so brutally to attack and undermine individuals that oppose the dominant narratives?
I think about what women in many parts of the world go through, who can't even leave the house without a male relative, who can't leave the house without completely covered, even if that's not their choice, who can't make decisions about their own lives without being punished, sometimes severely, even to the point of stoning. And I think, what the hell are you afraid of, Marianne? They're going to throw tomatoes at you or say mean things about you in People magazine. Who are you if that will stop you? Who are you if being embarrassed or being humiliated will stop you? I think every woman in a free society, and that's only about 20% of the peoples of the world, we should think of ourselves as speaking not only for ourselves, but for every woman out there who cannot speak for herself.
I can't think of a culture where individualism is more worship, where the idea that you make your own luck, that you make your own fortune, the rags to riches, the idea of personal success is so embedded. And doesn't that sort of, the deep DNA stitching of that ideology to a great degree prevent us of thinking in terms of collective identity, prevent us thinking, well, you know, what's happening to people in the Yemen is our responsibility, or the history of African American people or former colonized nations is our responsibility, you know, because don't we just think, well, basically I want to sort myself out. I mean, we're at a festival in a sense that's about individual wellness, rather than why don't we all club together and sort out some shit in Saudi Arabia.
Well, any time in life with any strength, you have to watch out for the shadow, watch out for the flip side. So in America, one of our strengths, one of our characterological strengths is what you just referred to. It's rugged individualism. Anybody can make it. You can do whatever you want. But that has become unbalanced, and it has been used to legitimize a selfishness. And we have legitimized over the last 50 years in America, we have taken this idea of rugged individualism and we have made it too much legitimization of rugged narcissism. But I think many people in America realize this. This is when I said before Milton Friedman hooked up with Ayn Rand. Yeah, it's a perverted sense when it's really all for me, and to hell with what happens to other people. That is the disease, the belief that it's all about you. You know, in the human body, every cell is assigned to other cells to collaborate with those cells in order to serve the healthy functioning of the whole. When a cell goes off on its own, disconnects from that collaborative matrix, doesn't remember, no, this is about working with other cells to serve the healthy functioning of the whole, goes off to do its own thing, that's called cancer. That's malignant in the body, and it's malignant in consciousness. And that's what's happened from a spiritual, metaphysical perspective. That's what's happened to the human race. We have been infected with a malignant consciousness. It's all about me. And I think many people are realizing where this mentality has gotten us, particularly to the extent to which it infuses our economics, to the extent to which money has such an undue influence on our government that it's in service as handmaiden to that economic system, which is basically sociopathic. Because a sociopath has no empathy. A sociopath has no remorse. A sociopath just wants what they want. And so you have this sociopathic ethos. This is now that has infused our economics. It's deep in the bones of how we're operating. And that's why it needs to be named, it needs to be called forth, and it needs to be changed. And I think that those of us in the spiritual community have a lot to look at in ourselves, because none of this came out of nowhere. None of this could have happened had we not taken democracy for granted, had we not thought somebody else, I'm not political, somebody else will handle that. That's what we've learned about this. We've learned how naive we were. You can never take democracy for granted. It's just like health, and that's why this is a perfect place to be discussing this. You have to take care of your nutrition. You have to take care of your exercise. You have to take care of your spiritual path, your lifestyle, all kinds of things. You can't not cultivate health. Just wait till sickness almost inevitably arises and seek through allopathic means alone to just eradicate or suppress the symptoms. That model of allopathic medicine has now given way to an integrative approach. We need to do that with society. You can't not cultivate justice, not cultivate mercy, not cultivate democracy, not cultivate compassion, not look at mass incarceration because it's not in your neighborhood, not look at wealth inequality because it's not in your neighborhood, not look at what's happening to the food supply because you can drink green juice. You can't do that and then be all shocked when this explosion of dysfunction and anti-democratic assault happens. Now, it's the 11th hour. We can handle this. I think we're going to move through this, but we have to change. And that includes taking responsibility as citizens for our part in it getting to this point. We have to change. Martin Luther King said there have to be, we need quantitative, external quantitative changes in our circumstances and qualitative changes in our souls. I think we get too concerned with the majority. The majority didn't wake up one day and say, let's free the slaves. The majority didn't wake up one day and say, let's give women the right to vote. Society changes because a small group of people, usually considered outrageous radicals by the status quo of their time, have a better idea. It's just like in evolution of a species. If the collective behavioral patterns are maladaptive for the survival of the species, then it will either go extinct or it will change. So there's the introduction of the mutation, and then the mutation is never the majority, but it's the only survivable option. So what's happening in the world is that our collective behavioral patterns are maladaptive for survival of our species. And all the great avatars and spiritual wisdoms, they are the mutation. They show another possibility. So I think sometimes we worry too much about the mainstream. The mainstream, the abolitionists were not the mainstream. The women suffragettes were not the mainstream. The civil rights was not the mainstream. Don't worry about the horizontal. Stay with the vertical. Say what you think. And conviction becomes a force multiplier. We need to get out of denial and go into transcendence. Transcendence is not where you deny all those awful things that you just listed about economics, nation states, and so forth. The point is we have to name it. And I think it is happening. When you say, how do we do it? You're being led to do it. I'm being led to do it. And I'm assuming everybody in the audience in their own way is being led to do it. The fact that people wanted to listen to this podcast, they know you're doing it and they know I'm doing it. So that by definition means that you're part of that conversation. There is no coming to God except through the person in front of you. That is, the Course in Miracles says belief in God doesn't mean anything. It's the experience of God. And the experience of God is our love for each other. I love how in the Course it says some people conspire with God who do not yet believe in him. It's like you and I were talking before about atheism and so forth. So yeah, I learned that loving other people, everything is secondary. And my capacity to reach across the wall that separates me from others through my own judgment, through my own attack thoughts, through my own failure to take responsibility, self-righteousness or whatever, that work on myself is the spiritual work.
To prepare yourself so that you are able to feel God or love or whatever word's convenient in your relationships with other people. This is
the experience of God.
More. Tell us more.
Well, the Course in Miracles says there is no getting to heaven. It says heaven is entered 2 by 2. You cannot get there unless you take someone with you. And heaven is not a condition or a place, but an awareness of our oneness. One of the issues that has been that I've been very passionate about is talking about the sociopathic economics and how even human pain will be turned into a profit center if there's money to be made for some corporation. I'm very concerned about what I think of as the psychotherapeutic, psychopharmacological industrial complex, which has chosen, for the sake of a billion-dollar industry, to medicalize human despair. And the truth of the matter is depression, and I'm not talking about bipolar or schizophrenia. That's outside my lane, outside my purview. But the normal spectrum of human despair is my lane, because the real spiritual path does not just take a yellow smiley face like this and put it over everything, go be happy, be happy. Buddha would not have begun his path of enlightenment until he crossed his father's walls and saw suffering for the first time. Moses was sent by God to the Israelites because they were suffering in Egypt as slaves, and Jesus suffered on the cross. So the real spiritual outlook recognizes the suffering of the human condition when we're living outside the context of our love for each other. So that, if you had a heartbreak, a divorce, financial failure, bankruptcy, lost someone you loved, these things are painful, but they're not mental illnesses. And that's why in that book I write, this is what Buddhism says, this is what the Old Testament says, this is what the New Testament says. AA or anything else, that's why you keep coming back, because it's a rough day today. It's recognized it's a rough day today. It's recognized it's a rough day today. And if you're left on your own, God knows what your mind might lead you to do. So when you know principles, whatever your path is, and you practice them. So you asked about myself. Okay, Marianne, and I've lived 2 periods of time that by any means today would be called clinical depression. But even that's such a scam. All that means is somebody in a clinic said it. There is no blood test, right? But if you've been there, you know it. Okay, Marianne, number 1, you don't even think this is going to be done quickly. So none of this, like just, today people say, well, your mother died a month ago. Aren't you over it yet? No. Okay, it's going to take time. Number 2, who are the safe people who can accompany you on this? Who aren't going to say, who aren't going to, who are the people who will bear witness to your agony during this time? You probably want to get a lot of, what are the movies and the what are the things that you're going to need to support you? Make sure you have a lot of bubble bath. Make sure that you stay with your meditation, even though you don't want to. Stay with your prayer work. Make sure you show up for other people. You will have a tendency to isolate during this period of time. You must not do that. You must get up and work. Your subconscious will put aside your despair while you're showing up for other people. And then when you come back from that, you'll go back to crying again. There is an art to navigating despair. There is an art to navigating depression, and the spiritual principles lead us there. There are seasons of life. I quote in that book from Rilke where he says, "Let me not squander the hour of my pain." When you recognize the depth of the serious problems confronting us, sober people are sober. These are sobering times. Not everything is rah-rah. That's why even in our community, too often, there's this infantilization. Too many women acting like girls, too many men acting like boys, at least in America. It's a crisis of adulthood. And I think now a deep recognition of our own suffering, and you don't want to desensitize yourself to your own suffering. If I desensitize myself to my own suffering, I'm more likely to be insensitive to the suffering of others. I remember when we invaded Iraq, and all these women, this is rain of fire on their homes and their children that they couldn't protect, and their husbands they couldn't protect, their sons they couldn't protect. They'd done nothing to us. They'd had nothing to do with 9/11, and even if they had weapons of mass destruction, we do business with people who do have weapons of mass destruction every day. And I would say to people, this is terrible, and they would give me the most facile answers. So we have to bear witness to our own agony and be with people who bear witness to others, because we have an agonized world we have to address. It's the 11th hour, but it's not midnight yet. I also remind you, even here in the United States, Gore won. And I remind you that Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes. At this point, we are being tyrannized by a minority. And it's important for us to remember that. So this extreme right-wing force field in America today, and I realize it's happening, it's a global threat, but I believe in every country in the world that the yearning of the human heart to be free of this is evident everywhere, and it's inside and it's outside. And yes, I believe it's happening. It's like that line, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The Course in Miracles says God's will has never not been done. We are going to overthrow the tyranny of a sociopathic economic ordering principle. It's going to happen because it is too out of alignment with nature. The only issue is how much suffering is going to happen first. And that choice is up to you and me. And as long as people like yourself, Russell, the very fact that you are at a place in your life, you could use your fame only for frivolous, silly things, but you're choosing not to. And there are millions of people doing the same. Let's not forget to give credit where credit's due. We're in the middle of this. We're doing it. And I think we're going to pull this off.